This is Food for Thought with Deborah Walker. On this week's Food for Thought, I have Jayney Goddard, who is the president of the Complementary Medical Association, which is the world's largest professional membership body for complementary medicine. She is widely regarded as one of the leading experts on complementary medicine and natural healthcare. She's a Fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine and a Fellow of the Royal Society for Public Health, with a vast depth of knowledge across the entire field of complementary medicine, and highly respected, I have to say. I've asked her to come on today to bring some balance to some of the latest news articles that are happening around homeopathy. Jayney, how are you today?
I'm absolutely fantastic, thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me on. It's really very kind of you, and actually very important at this particular point in time.
Yes. Do you want to explain why it's very important at this point in time?
Yes, why not? Good idea, good place to start. It's very interesting. I've been president of the Complementary Medical Association for 21 years now, and I was the founder of the organisation all those years ago. And the reason that we started up was because there is actually a huge evidence base across the field in complementary medicine. I personally trained, my first discipline I trained in was homeopathic medicine. And at the time, there were quite a few sort of attacks on the field. And I thought, well, actually, it's a bit strange, it's a bit spurious, because there's all this evidence base. And isn't it a shame that nobody seems to know about it? These poor scientists, bless them, they don't know where to look. And so I was coming at this from, very much a perspective of, the innocent, shall we say, without actually knowing kind of what's going on underneath. Anyway, so what I noticed was that that there's a sort of a seesaw thing. Sometimes the attacks happen, sometimes they don't. And obviously back then, back in the 90s, there was less of an evidence base. And, as homeopaths, we were saying, well, we know it works because we see it working. We acknowledge that certainly more work needs to be done to actually ascertain what the mechanism of action is in homeopathy, because let's face it, we are using these incredibly dilute substances and we treat them in a certain way, which seems to somehow magically transform them into things that make our patients better. Brilliant, we know it works, but we don't know how. And so, of course, any sensible homeopath worth their salt was saying, well, yeah, let's do, bring it on, let's do more research. But we knew that we were up against a bit of a sticky wicket, because the essence of homeopathic medicine, of course, is that we don't treat symptoms. We don't treat diseases in a person. We actually treat the whole person. And the point of that means that we actually have to take a very in-depth case study, which tends to take at least an hour of time to really fully understand what it is about that patient that makes them as a whole being completely unique. And then we're working from there to find the specific remedy amongst many thousands of remedies at the specific strength or potency, if you like, that's what we call it, that actually matches their symptoms. So it's a very in-depth process. It takes a lot of brain work. Homeopathy is a very long training process, and so on. And so because of that, homeopathy has never really totally lent itself to the standard medical model, which is, yes, let's just do a placebo-controlled trial, and everybody fits into a little box. Let's tick this box, let's tick that box, because of this individualized approach. Now, that was back then, but since then, things have moved on dramatically, and some very, very brilliant people have actually managed to structure studies that actually can run placebo-controlled trials against standard drugs and so on and so forth. So what we're starting to find is that there's this huge evidence base now. And it's very interesting because I noticed for a while, with a lot of the information going out there about the latest research, that's not just conducted in humans, it's also conducted in animal models, and it's also conducted in vitro, so cells in a petri dish. And certainly these very highly diluted medicines are actually having an effect. They actually work. And so for a while, that stymied the critics of homeopathy because, really the evidence was there and there was very little for them to actually say. They were still sticking their heads above the parapets and saying, oh, yes, but we don't know why it works in humans. Yes, we acknowledge that these cells in this Petri dish have changed. For example, Debbie, a great study was where breast cancer cells and healthy breast tissue were put into a Petri dish and a homeopathic remedy was introduced, and it selectively killed off the breast cancer cells whilst leaving the healthy cells intact. You see, that was a replicable study, and it's kind of irrefutable. It worked. So they had to stand up and say, okay, yes, something's happening here. So everything went a bit quiet on the skeptic front for a while, and now what is that they have started sticking their heads above the parapets yet again. I'm not quite sure why. And what's happening is we're getting very, very mixed messages. One of the latest salvos, for example, was... I think it was led by Edzard Ernst, who used to work at the University of Exeter as a professor of complementary medicine, which was quite funny, really, because he sort of seemed to have an agenda that was actually really not very supportive of complementary medicine. He had very little understanding of the holistic approach, whereby you need to take into consideration mind and body, emotions and so on, because let's face it, we are actually human beings, not, numbers or anything that can be divided down into sort of rational elements. We're strange and interesting human creatures. He never really seemed to take any of that into consideration. And then, of course, his whole background was sort of subject to question, and it was all got a bit nasty, and it was all a bit unfortunate. But he was retired. We don't quite know what happened there, but, something happened, and he was no longer in that position. And then what happened was that recently he's been sort of quoted and talking about fatalities caused by homeopathic medicines. But you see, what I fail to understand, just being a silly little homeopath, is that if these substances that we use as homeopaths have absolutely no effect because they're diluted beyond all recognition, how can they possibly have any fatal effect on anybody? How can they possibly harm anybody? You can't have it both ways. And I want them to actually take a stance. Which way do you want it?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because in one breath they're stating it's a sugar pill.
Yes.
Or that it's no more, I think actually says it's only a placebo. Yes. And then in the other side of it, they're actually registering homeopaths in the likes of Ontario, Canada, to protect people, to protect the wider public. Which side is it? And because that actually it either is of harm or it isn't fundamentally. But you've got disparity even in government policy, haven't you? Because you've got the likes of India, who are pushing back the boundaries with homeopathy and supporting it wholeheartedly, using it extensively as part of their healthcare system. Yet Australia's top body of medical research, the National Health and Medical Research Council, I think I've got that right, after undertaking extensive review of about over 200 studies, they basically said their stance is effectively that it's not effective for treating any health condition, is their stance. Well, how can there be such disparity between governments?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? And isn't it intriguing? For example, I've got a recent study that was just published in March 13th, actually, 2015, where they... let's talk about whether or not homeopathic medicines can actually treat a condition. Okay, this was an individualized homeopathic treatment, and fluoxetine, which is an antidepressant, which was both of those were studied for women who were suffering from moderate to severe depression in peri- and postmenopausal situations. Now, this was a randomized, double-dummy, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, so the gold standard of scientific research, okay? What they found was that both homeopathy and fluoxetine are effective and safe antidepressants for peri- and postmenopausal women. Homeopathy and fluoxetine were significantly different from placebo in response. However, homeopathy, but not fluoxetine, improves menopausal symptoms. So, I don't know how you can argue against that. Am I missing the point here? I don't think I am. This was a very, very well constructed, very well put together trial and published in a respected journal. So I have to say, I think, when you're talking about, the Australian government and so on, I think the point is they've sort of been got at. And I know it sounds a bit crazy, and I know it sounds possibly a little bit sort of a conspiracy theorist. But there's just been an awful lot of very, very strange misinformation. I mean, for example, the statements coming out of the Australian government, for example, were referring back to the UK position, the House of Lords investigation, which was conducted over here some years ago and was widely discredited. And even the people that took part in it, admitted that it was a complete waste of time. The homeopaths were not even invited. Homeopathic doctors were not even invited to comment or provide any evidence. It was a bit like a sort of a witch trial from back in the day with the Witchfinder General. It worries me. It really, really worries me that there's all of this misinformation, yet the powers that be are not prepared to actually stand up and say, hang on a second, there are these effects going on in people, in animals, in petri dishes, in test tubes. Something's happening. Why don't we look into this instead of brushing it conveniently under the carpet?
And why aren't they? Why, from your perspective, aren't they actually researching more into it?
I assume, and it's my assumption, that the only thing we can do is follow the money. You can't patent homeopathic remedies in general. They cost next to nothing to manufacture. And I just assume, because logic dictates, that the vested interest in ensuring that homeopathy doesn't survive has to come from the pharmaceutical industry, because they are the only body that would be actually affected by homeopathy being more successful. Because clearly it works for patients. Clearly it works for animals. Why is it that so many farmers choose to use homeopathic medicines? Well, I'll tell you why. Because they work and they're dirt cheap. And you can't say that a herd of cows is subject to the placebo effect. Obviously, logic dictates that is the case. So there really has to be, Occam's razor, when everything else is, you've just got to boil down to the most obvious and simplest explanation, and that has to be it. It has to be that they are being, they had the ear of the pharmaceutical industry has the ear of the Australian government, and is essentially lobbying in whatever way, officially or unofficially.
Well, it's not just the ear of the actual government, it's most obviously the ear of the mainstream media, because we're not, the reason I asked you on today wasn't because I'd read one article about the negativity around homeopathy. I read the same thing over and over again. Now, I had just 12 articles, and at that point I got a bit fed up, if I'm honest, of reading the same thing over and over again.
Yes, they're all very similar, aren't they? Have you noticed that?
Absolutely, they are very similar, and they, as are many of the mainstream news articles nowadays, they all tend to come from one or two sources. Now, right from the Daily Mail right through to the Guardian, it was very much the same message over and over again. But it's so very polarised, it gets so very negative between us and them. Why is it so much like that? Why is it such a fight? Why is there so much negativity about something that is considered in their eyes as actually being, is not effective?
Well, Who knows? I don't really think that we have enough data to actually understand quite why there is this. It's absolute vitriol, isn't it?
It is,
and it's actually lies, because the thing is that. There's so much information, and really, truthfully, it isn't actually accurate. So why is it that these organisations, these bodies, are happy to disseminate actual lies? I don't know. It's very, very concerning, isn't it? It's very, very worrying. I don't know that it's just lazy journalism. Is there an extra agenda? Who knows? But I have to say, I wouldn't really put anything past the pharmaceutical industry. Let's face it. A pharmaceutical company has a duty. It's a company. It has a legal duty to make a profit for its shareholders. If it doesn't do that, it's failing in its legal duty. So essentially, in order to maintain your profit base and stop your profit levels from being eaten away by competitors, you probably have to try to eliminate the competition.
One of the experts that was used in one of the Guardian pieces was Dr Ken Harvey, a medicinal drug policy expert and consumer health advocate. And so there's a clear bias there for a start, and on his statement. But he states, "I have no problems with private colleges wanting to run courses on crystal ball gazing, iridology, and homeopathy. And if people are crazy enough to pay for it, it's their decision." But it's very emotive language, and it's very much a language that very much says, if you choose this, you're kind of a bit stupid.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, yes. It's always been the way, hasn't it? It's just it's actually a bullying tactic. It is. What can we do? What are the things we can do? It's always about making people look stupid. It's always about discrediting. This is the way that it happens. I mean, it's interesting because I've had so many attacks. Because I've dared to put my head above the parapet and speak out and talk about trials in homeopathy. And my approach has always been to present the data and say, well, look, here's the data. Make of this what you will. But because I've done this in quite a sort of dispassionate way, simply asking people to just please look at the data, isn't that, if you're a scientist, surely you must have some scientific curiosity, because this is an outlier. This doesn't comply with our standard understanding of science. We're still locked in very much sort of a Newtonian model in spite of advances in quantum science. So it's just quite intriguing that nobody's prepared to actually take up the gauntlet and actually do the proper science, do the proper research. As I say, though, having said that, things are not all that bleak because there is this growing database, and there is an understanding that amongst some quarters, mainly coming out of nanotechnology, would you believe, and also other quarters, India, China, all of these countries with huge populations who Cuba, for example, where they've got huge populations of people, and they need to get inexpensive medicines and inexpensive and effective medicines to that population. So I think really it's intriguing, and I think actually what speaks in this particular example is the fact that where there's little profit motive, homeopathy is actually being investigated. In countries where medicine is all about money, let's brush homeopathy under the carpet because actually it doesn't fit in our model because we can't make money out of it.
Well, this is what I don't understand, to be honest, Jayney, because if they wanted to just brush it under the carpet, surely just ignoring it would leave it as a minority. But instead, they're bringing a lot of attention to an alternative therapy, almost to, rather than brush it under the carpet, completely and utterly discredit it, even when you're stating that there's actually quite a large body of research evidence, and there are some governments, like the Indian government, who are investing in it as their key healthcare system.
Yes.
Yeah, well, the other side of this is, for me, it's not just about science. What about the experience of the patient in this? Because I feel that side of healthcare is completely ignored in regards to homeopathy. That unless it's proven in science that actually that person, no matter what they say, in effect, must be crazy. Actually, that's totally unfair in many respects.
Terribly insulting, isn't it? Terribly insulting. But yes, yeah, the thing is though, Debbie, going back, it really is the standard sort of patriarchal medical model, isn't it? You're supposed to sit there as a patient while the doctor, in that sort of very patriarchal model, does something to you. Don't ask questions. In fact, I remember doing a TV program with a doctor who actually said, oh gosh, last thing we want is an informed patient. That's a doctor's nightmare. And then I remember Dr. Rosemary Leonard saying, oh, it's our absolute nightmare when a patient comes in with printouts that they've found on the internet, and they seem to think that they know about, their symptoms. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because in homeopathy, I was always trained. I had an exceptional training. I was unbelievably privileged to have the training I had. It was just outstanding. And we were always trained to actually come from the position where we were told to understand that the patient was usually right, if not always. If a patient says something, the chances are, because they have insight, they have knowledge, they understand their bodies and their symptoms far, far better than anybody else does. So come from the position where the patient is actually correct and work it out from there. Whereas that flies in the face of the patriarchal medical model, the conventional medical model. So yes, it's very, very insulting, and it really is. It's actually, I think, very, very worrying. And actually, I think, Debbie, what the situation is that I think this is one of the reasons why pharmaceutical medicine has sort of shot itself in the foot, because I think so many people are disenchanted with, being patted on the head, totally patronised, and, being told to sort of sit down, shut up, take your medicine. Now, I must express at this point, I am not rabidly anti-conventional medicine, okay? Absolutely not. A lot of people think, oh yeah, she's a raving alternativist and so on and so forth. My mother is a type 1 diabetic. Without insulin, my mother would not be alive. I am not stupid enough to think that one system of medicine has all of the answers. It doesn't. But what I think we need to do is to find out and be open to figuring out what is the best medicine for that individual at that particular time.
And that comes into one of my points really, which is, shouldn't your healthcare be your choice?
Oh God, absolutely. Of course it should.
And therefore, what I don't understand is why, we've got policies that protect against things that actually really don't need protecting against. And yet we've got foods on our shelves that are actually knowledgeably damaging. We've got medicines available that actually have side effects that are worse than the actual illness itself. Shouldn't we therefore be embracing all forms of expression of healthcare that actually individuals choose to go down the route of?
Well, yes. Wouldn't that be logical? It would, wouldn't it? I mean, it just is. I just find with my science hat on, I find it really difficult to understand why these things are actually being rejected out of hand, why homeopathy and other forms of complementary medicine are being rejected out of hand. Of course, homeopathy is a bit of a soft target because it doesn't conform to the standard scientific model as we know it.
We call it homeopathy, and now we've got nanotechnology happening. How close are they related?
They're actually very closely related in many ways. What I think is very interesting, there is a journal called the International Journal of High Dilution Research, and they talk in terms, they do a lot of studies in homeopathy with these highly diluted substances. And So they're talking in terms of nanomedicines and so on. So I think that's where you're sort of starting to see a convergence from several different fields. The field that really is pioneering nanotechnology in chemistry is the petrochemical field. And they have discovered information that's actually quite helpful to us as homeopaths, whereby you can take, you can take certain substances and you can dilute and dilute and dilute, and you'll still see evidence or an imprint of that original substance on the very, very diluted preparation. So it's intriguing that a completely unrelated field is really quite helpful to us because obviously they've got the big bucks to do the research. So we can sort of piggyback on that and say, well, okay, you've demonstrated in your petrochemical research that, this happens. So we can extrapolate from there and say, well, this also happens because we're using the same techniques to do our dilutions and shaking. So it's quite useful for us in many ways that that nanotechnology is advancing as rapidly as it is.
So in effect, this is going to get quite awkward at some stage because they're almost it's just about the name at that point then, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. Do we rebrand homeopathy? Medicine? I don't know. Actually, does it really matter what the name is? I mean, the word homeopathy is a beautiful word. It sort of does what it says on the tin, meaning, homeo, homeo and then pathy, meaning like suffering, because obviously in homeopathic treatment we use the terminology like treats like, so we're matching a person's manifestation of their suffering or their symptoms with the information that we have gathered from research in human studies, and we're matching those together. So, like treating like, it's a very, very elegant system of medicine. And the idea being that we introduce this information into the body. We can't call it a medicine as such because it's actually it's encoded information into the body, which somehow allows the body to sort of regain homeostasis. So I think, can we rebrand homeopathy? Can we call it nanomedicine? Why not? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet.
Do you think that no matter what science and research homeopathy does to prove their worth and their effectiveness, that it will continually be discredited?
Yeah, the only way that it's not going to be, given that the reason for the discrediting is a financial reason, there's no other reason that stands up to scrutiny. So the only way that it would stop being subject to all of this negative scrutiny, by the way, is if you can start to create patentable medicines. If there's something that can be done, so some sort of tweak, probably going to be, with my crystal ball here, submolecular tweak that can be done, which would render something patentable, then the drug companies will start to sit up and take notice, because then obviously they can slap on a massive markup and start selling it into places like the NHS and on the free market in America, etc., at huge profit. I mean, actually, it's worth their while to look into it. If they're listening, which they probably are, it's worth their while looking into it, because if they can do that, then the inexpensive production of homeopathic medicines would really ramp up their profit margins no end.
Mm-hmm. So where do people go to find out about the science that you've been talking about today?
My goodness me. There are so many resources. The Complementary Medical Association website is a fantastic resource of information across the board about all different types of complementary medicine. At last count, I think we're up to about 7,500 pages of articles on the site about every type of complementary medicine that there is. And then, of course, you've got fantastic resources like the Homeopathy Research Institute. You've got organisations like the Alliance for Natural Health. And, of course, you've got Dana Ullman, who's homeopathy's Superman. I'm sure he wears his knickers over his tights with a cape, looking cool. But yeah, Dana is a fabulous man who actually pulls together so much homeopathy research, writes tremendous books on the subject, and you really. He's got a very good eye. He's a very shrewd man. He's got a very, very good eye for sniffing out truth and evidence. And so, yes, he's worth looking at as well. And then, of course, in India, you've got Saurav Arora, and if you just Google his name, you'll come up with his website. He's put together a fabulous database of all of the homeopathic trials, so all credit to him for doing that. So there's actually a huge amount of data, huge amount of very accessible data.
And what I notice is that basically that if the research isn't done in establishments that are approved of in the Western world, so in the UK and the US, then it's very much ignored. And actually this can be quite significant research bodies that are ignored, can't it?
Yes, it can actually. I mean, there's this interesting situation, which actually I think is quite disgusting. But there is a model, certainly in the UK and the US. I can't speak for other countries because I simply don't know. I just happen to live in America and the UK, whereby if medical research is not conducted in that country, it is summarily dismissed. So, for example, if you have Chinese or Indian studies, they are deemed by the establishment to be of little value. Because after all, it's really sinister, and it's really very arrogant. There's this sort of arrogance which dictates that, well, if we didn't do it, it's no good then, is it? And I find that really offensive.
Yeah.
It's, because you've got brilliant, beautifully structured research coming out of those countries, far better than we can do here. They've got a lot more money to throw at these things, and they do. But it's, if it didn't happen where we, need it to happen, then we're not going to look at it.
Jayney Goddard, thank you so much for coming on Food for Thought today. How do people get in contact with you and the Complementary Medical Association?
Oh, easy peasy. Thank you, Debbie. And thank you so much for having me. I have really loved being with you. Yes, if anybody wants to carry on chatting about this and finding out about the work that we do at the Complementary Medical Association and with all the various exciting things that we have going on, the website is all the W's, of course. Then it's which is the-CMA.org.uk. And to get hold of us by email, it's just basically the same. So it's admin@the-cma.org.uk, or you can ring us on 0845 129 8434. That's a UK number. If you're phoning in from abroad, just drop the 0 and prefix it with 44.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Not at all. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.